Donald Trump said something that has now caused Bitcoin to crash. At least a small mini crash. Bitcoin is dropping by several $1,000s here because the market is currently unsettled, because Donald Trump is actually imposing tariffs here. And that's shaking up the entire global financial markets. Bitcoin is also being pulled down here. Let's take a look at what's going on with that. Donald Trump also announced the 100% tariffs yesterday for all countries that no longer cooperate with the US dollar, marching in, building their own payment initiatives, using their own currencies, which might also use Bitcoin, and so on. Donald Trump really wants to tie the whole world to the US dollar now. And additionally, anyone who stands against the US dollar, anyone who opposes the USA here, will be punished with massive tariffs here. And the global financial market is now seeing this very clearly, very critically. And here, Bitcoin is being pulled down. This whole thing doesn't have anything to do with Bitcoin directly. We keep seeing that Bitcoin is being pulled down. Not because something is happening with Bitcoin, because the code is broken, or whatever, but simply because Bitcoin is tied to the global financial markets. Also, it's now being revealed that the newly appointed FBI director here is someone Donald Trump wants to put in place. Bitcoin Hash. So, we now have the next big player in the Donald Trump administration team, who owns Bitcoin. We also have a new, very exciting statement from CSAT, who is really going hard against the EU. Because the EU doesn't have any Bitcoin and is missing the boat on this. Christine Lagarde has also made a statement, said no, Bitcoin and so on, not a legitimate asset. And the ECB is definitely not going to buy that. We're not doing that kind of crap that Donald Trump is planning here. But here we're just going to hold fiat. We have completely normal, classic reserves, bonds and stuff. But for us, Bitcoin isn't going on the reserve. But we really need to take a look at the tariffs in the USA first. Because this is really crazy. What's going on here? By the way, I'm here in El Salvador in front of the Google Tower. I don't think you can see that here anymore. You can't see the Google sign. That's somewhere over on the other side. Here's this huge Google Tower, and here's the president. And over on the other side, the Bitcoin conference is happening up front later, where I'm about to have a Trump gig. For sure, something's being said about the tariffs over at the White House. That we're now hearing that it really led to that. In just a few minutes, the Bitcoin price crashed by several thousand US dollars. When the video goes online, it could be that the Bitcoin price has already bounced back, because we often see that such shock news tends to recover very quickly. That's why you shouldn't let stuff like that drive you crazy. Because we keep seeing it, there are always some shocking events. The market doesn't really know how to assess it at first. Then it goes down first. A couple $1,000s down. But then it often bounces back pretty quickly because the market realizes, hey, it's not as bad as it looks at first.
I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
The president yesterday said that last night he was planning to discuss whether an exemption would be made on oil imports. Do you have any information on what decision he made there, or will there be exemptions at all offered under those?
I don't have an update or readout for you on the exemptions, but those tariffs will be for public consumption in about 24 hours tomorrow, so you can read them then.
So here we've heard that tariffs are being introduced. So here in Canada, it's 25%, Mexico 10%, China 10%. And that's basically it. This is already a wild story. That's happening here. I gotta say, Donald Trump is definitely pushing through here. And that really brings a lot. There's a lot of uncertainty in the whole market. If you don't know right now, okay, how is this all going to play out? How can this move forward now? I'd say it could turn out very well for the USA, right? But this could also end very badly here. And I really noticed that in my video that I published yesterday, where I talked about the 100% tariffs. The ones that Donald Trump has partially announced here. I mean, these are obviously also fear tactics and stuff. They're basically showing that here now.
Okay, I'm the powerful man and all. I can flex my power and stuff like that.
But a lot of people have really said, Donald Trump, he's showing his unpredictable side now. He's really gone off the deep end. You can't just treat everything here like it's a closed-off America. You also need free trade here. You can't just say, hey, we're the big boss and we're just gonna do everything here in our country. And everyone else, we're just gonna punish them and it's all about America first. That just doesn't work. And what's often not mentioned in the whole story, America is basically built on the theft from third world countries and stuff. It doesn't matter if it's raw materials. It doesn't matter if it's in the form of inflation. It basically takes the US dollar spread to other countries.
And then their money gets inflated.
If you just have the largest currency area, you have the biggest sandwich effect and so on.
Those are things that often go unrecognized.
And then it's always said, America is the great country. But if you take a look at how prosperity was created,
Of course, there are certain core values that have contributed to that.
or maybe a certain mindset, or whatever, what else is it due to? But it really comes down to the fact that purchasing power is systematically redistributed from third world countries. Resources are being redistributed. And in the end, it's really a very, very unfair system. You can also take a look at the book by Alex Glatz, who breaks this down very, very precisely, how all of this works exactly. But you definitely have a double-edged sword here. That means, on one hand, it can definitely work well. That then the USA stands even stronger, that basically the USA appears more independent, and so on. But on the other hand, it's also the case that, normally, we have division of labor. That means, for example, some goods, they end up, I don't know, if they can be produced better in China, then they'll just be produced in China. I once saw a statistic somewhere that if an iPhone were only produced in Germany, it would somehow 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 euros in costs, because it's just better to produce it in China. Because they have the know-how there, because the labor is cheaper and stuff like that. So then you basically import that from China. And just like that, there are other countries that have their own specialties. That might have, for example, particularly good wood, or whatever. And so you end up with a global division of labor. But if you just say, we're cutting ourselves off from that, because we're just the bosses here, and because we're just better here, and because we want to play the strongman now, then that can definitely have consequences. That inflation is also rising. And some people here in the USA are expecting to see a massive increase in inflation. Because of the tariffs here, of course. Now it might also get more expensive for companies to get products from Canada, to get products from China. Some things you just might not be able to make in the USA. Instead, you have to import some things here. Then it all becomes really, really difficult. I mean, from Donald Trump's perspective, he basically says, yeah, China is going to suffer from this, or Canada will suffer from this. Because then they won't be able to sell their products anymore. And the US is the biggest buyer here. But that can also backfire, because it could also be the case that the products are selling really, really well from China, and that they will definitely find new buyers. And in the end, it's not, let's say, China.
The one who has to pay for this is actually the US itself, which will end up having a big problem.
And Donald Trump is already dealing with inflation problems. This will definitely fuel inflation even more. But that also means, if we have strong inflation, then we have a weak dollar. If the dollar gets devalued, then that's obviously good for Bitcoin. And there are definitely a lot of factors to consider here. What we definitely see is that we now have an absolutely intense America First policy again. And a lot of people think that's great, like those who say, yeah, finally he's imposing tariffs and all that, because they basically played games with him, and now he's just not putting up with those games anymore. Yeah, you can see it either way. I don't want to take a side or anything. But you have to say that some of these are definitely socialist measures that he's doing here. Because he's really playing the big king and basically ruining free trade here. I mean, anyone with a decent amount of common sense should be able to understand that. That basically free trade, free money, free markets, that in the end it's better to impose restrictions and a whole lot of market interventions. Because what's happening here is nothing more than a huge market intervention. For example, some people say, we trade with them, but we don't trade with other people. And then the USA has the biggest weapons. The USA has the biggest currency monopoly here. The USA has the largest economy here.
And these weapons that it has, you can definitely leverage them.
That means, on one hand, she can cut people off from the financial market here. For example, she can cut certain nations off from the US dollar. For example, she can say, you can't trade in US dollars. Or she can force other nations, for example, that if you don't trade in US dollars, then you'll face tariffs here. And then you also have the economic pressure, where you can, for example, say, okay, we're not taking your products anymore, and the USA is launching a really big global market. And what if the USA stops buying products from a certain country? Or something like that can definitely lead to problems in that country. As I said, it could also be that the country finds another buyer. But in the end, those are weapons that the USA has. Here, on one side is the economic space, and on the other side is the currency space. And Donald Trump knows that on one hand, he needs a strong dollar.
And on the other hand, that he also has a strong economy.
And only when he has those two things in place can he exert pressure on other nations. That means he's also kind of dependent here. You can also see that, for example, under Joe Biden, the dollar has been steadily losing value. Not just because of Biden, but also because of all the other presidents. The ones before, that the economy might not be as stable now, as it has been stated before. And now you have to come up with new means here. And the means are right here, tariffs. And that's being viewed very, very critically by the financial market. Even though as I said, I also suspect that this might not be a topic globally for long. And that people just understand that. It's just a shock because it's so unexpected. You don't see that in America. They make big changes. This tests markets. Make changes here. And that's always what makes it tough for the financial markets. When you make really drastic changes all at once. And then something else happened here. And it says here that Trump is a candidate for the position of FBI director. Cash Party holds Bitcoin products. From Grayscale worth over 100,000 US dollar. And shares of Core Scientific, which is also a Bitcoin company here. Here's a Bitcoin mining company worth up to 100,000 US dollars. So we now have the next person in the room who now also ultimately owns Bitcoin. In the Donald Trump administration or in the Donald Trump team, however you want to put it. And it's getting more and more, from the Vivek Ramaswamy to Elon Musk, to Howard Lutnick, the Treasury Secretary, SEC. Never mind, even the Secretary of Defense, even in the FBI and so on, Tulsi Gabbard. Or whatever her name is, she apparently has Bitcoin or at least has spoken positively about it. So, there are almost no people left in the Donald Trump team who are really against Bitcoin. Instead, we only have Bitcoin bulls left. Well, he's not exactly a Bitcoin bull if he has 100,000 US dollars, but at least he's here. No Bitcoin find. That's the big difference between the USA right now and Europe. Because in Europe, we just have the Bitcoin haters. I'll just say it like that. Here, CZ also said, the CEO of Binance, or the former CEO, I should say now. He says here, the EU needs Bitcoin. So, it's not that Bitcoin needs the EU, but the other way around. The EU needs Bitcoin because the EU is of course also a dying country or a country that is really, really weakening. And then, of course, you have to find new ways. Like Donald Trump is finding new ways now. He does things differently. He flips things upside down. Sure, some people might say, okay, are you crazy or something? Are you delusional? I was still with CZ, who basically says the EU really, really needs Bitcoin. And they definitely need it. Because the euro obviously has way more problems than the US dollar. So, the US dollar is losing value, but the euro is really losing value even more. And at some point, something has to change here. And the European Central Bank has now made that statement. No, the euro is definitely not going to make it onto our balance sheet. That's what Christine Lagarde said, that she can say outright that. They're not going to buy any Bitcoin. And that's just really, really ridiculous. When you look at it from one side, that people are open to innovations. They're open to Bitcoin, they're open to cryptocurrencies, to deep digital assets, and whatever. The EU is just shutting itself off. I'll say, in general. You can at least say, like for example, Czech Republic or the USA, we're forming a team here, we're gonna take a look, we're gonna evaluate this, we're just gonna discuss it, we're gonna see what the pros and cons are. And then you can still decide. But simply say per se, no, we won't do that at all, because that is really, really bad and is for criminals, has no liquidity and so on. I don't think that's the right approach, in my opinion. The global developments are definitely very, very interesting. We need to be precise now. Let's see how things go with the tariffs. Like I said, this isn't a big crash or anything, just a tiny mini super mini crash or whatever you want to call it. Free to write in comments what you call like this. Are there always these questions about definitions? What exactly is a crash? What's a mini crash? What's a pullback? What's a correction? And so on. But we definitely need to keep an eye on everything here. Just like the financial market, basically, assessing such steps from Donald Trump. Like I said, in my opinion, do we really need to think too much about this? Nothing is happening with Bitcoin here. I can also imagine it well, that the Bitcoin price will correct relatively quickly, because these pullbacks have nothing to do with Bitcoin itself. So either the code is broken here, nor is anything else happening in the Bitcoin space. Instead, it's just basically here. Side effects that also have an impact on Bitcoin. And if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily and super simply buy Bitcoin. Guys, see you later. Peace out.